It's Doug McIntyre, one of the editors at ClimateCrisis247, here with the other editor, Dave Calloway. And we're going to talk about climate change and nukes. There are two parts to this. The first one is global warming is uncovering sort of nuclear debris. And the other part is that a report came out that warned NATO that climate change was going to make it harder to wage nuclear war. So, Dave, let me start with you, and that's sort of nukes looking backward in the climate.
Yeah, it's funny, every time we think we have um, you know, determined exactly what the climate threat is, a new one emerges, right? And this is that is that worsening weather conditions and melting ice in many parts of the world are going to unearth nuclear debris, i.e., radioactive material, or make places where we've stored it less secure. And it's a real threat. I mean, we've heard before about how melting ice from the ice age is going to release, century-old diseases and stuff that are no longer around here. And now they're going to release nuclear debris. It's a new one on me, but quite scary, and hopefully is inviting a lot of kind of urgent focus.
It's sort of a good example, isn't it, of the maybe 50s, 60s, 70s idea that you can bury anything. It's just, if you've got a problem, it's pollution, it's nuclear, chemical. If you dig a deep enough hole or drop it far enough into the middle of the ocean, you're absolutely fine.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is like remember a couple of years ago when declining water levels in Nevada were suddenly bodies were appearing that had been
Yeah.
dumped in the reservoirs decades ago. Now it's nuclear material, and there's a lot of stuff that has been buried in all sorts of strange places that could not be as secure now as it maybe once was thought to be.
No, and again, I think it's part of that continuum. There was a study maybe a month ago about they sent some people down to one of these bells that would allow you to go down to like 20,000 feet, below the surface of the water. And they found plastic, microplastic
Yeah.
floating in the deepest part of the ocean. All this plastic that humans have dumped into the ocean, people say, oh, it's just floating around on the top. And the answer is no, no, it's not. It's all the way, it's down at the bottom.
Yeah.
So the other side to this story, which is about the future, is NATO has basically been warned that waging nuclear war out of Europe is becoming more difficult because of things like flash flooding. And when you think about it, I mean, a nuclear weapon is just a device. I mean, it's a physical device. It's got to go in a plane, it's got to go in a silo or something else. So there's now the government, NATO and the US government are going to have to start to revamp airports that where the planes take off, silos that are in areas with flash flooding. You're going to have to rebuild part of the infrastructure of nuclear weapons capability throughout Europe.
Yeah, and everywhere. I mean, I think one of the biggest government spenders on climate preparation is the U.S. Army, right? And they have entire strategies and efforts and programs developed into how they're going to fight wars in the future with climate change. How they're going to everything from moving troops to moving weapons to nuclear tactics, and that's going to be part of what they're looking at. And in Europe, it's where things are even more pressing. It's going to be a big NATO issue.
It also seems to me that if you look at the Defense Department budget, and you've just hinted at this, that a larger and larger part of it is going to have to do with things that weren't issues decades ago for the military. I mean, you just mentioned the Army, but a good example of that is that people say, well, the Panama Canal, that's just tankers and Suez. I mean, those are warship passages.
Yeah.
You don't want to have a destroyer go all the way down around the Cape of Good Hope and all the way back up into Asia. it's
Yeah.
it's a slow way to get there if you're in a war.
And
So
don't
this is
forget the melting ice is creating new passages in the Arctic,
right.
right? And an escalation of essentially a land grab of the Arctic from countries like Russia and China and the U.S.
Right. So you now can potentially wage war in a place that you couldn't wage war, but it's harder to get to places where you want to wage war.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's like, well, what are we going to? We've got all these ships. We can't get them anyplace. We'll all send them all to the North Pole. Uh, but isn't it astonishing that you're now at the point where you're talking about the military and you're talking about the most advanced parts of the military. A lot of them are the delivery of nuclear devices, and that's now becoming compromised.
Yeah, it's just it's part of the existential threat that is climate change. It's not just your houses, your real estate coastline in Florida. It's a big issue.
And it's one of the reasons they're sending nuclear devices into space because they don't.
That's
There aren't any climate problems
that we know of.
that we know of in space right now. Yeah,
Exactly.
I suppose that's the good news. Well, look, we're going to keep an eye on this because with the problems right now in Ukraine, and this you heard recently, there was saber rattling about sending Western troops into Ukraine.
Absolutely.
I don't. That's going to become more and more of a flashpoint. So whether you've got a capability in these places to wage war is going to become a bigger issue. And who would have thought that climate change would have been part of that? But it is.
Yeah.
It's good to talk to you about nukes and climate change. I'll catch up with you soon.
All right. Bye bye, Doug.